Thank you for joining and welcome. I'm Susan Berishaj, founder of C Admissions. For those of you who are new to our channel, to our content, just wanted to briefly share that we work with candidates at the strategy level of their MBA or EMBA application and even deferred MBA applications. So the people in this room are coming from different points. Some of you are early in the process, some are mid-cycle, and some of you are just pressure testing whether an MBA is even the right move. What this session is built around is one specific question. How does an operations or supply chain background get read at the programs that matter, the ones that obviously a lot of you in that space are interested in? And what does it take to make sure that it reads accurately the way you want to portray yourself? And that's what we're here to cover today. Before we go into the slides, I would love it if you let us know what you think of these presentations. So give it a thumbs up, give us comments on whichever platform you're joining us, but also ask questions while we're here live, because I'll have a very brief opportunity at the end to answer some of your questions. If you haven't subscribed to our channel, we host our usual weekly Thursday sessions live that cover a variety of different topics, but also sometimes we have special events that fall on different days that you may be interested in. So subscribe to our YouTube channel, our LinkedIn, so that you're notified of future events. And if you know someone in the space who is interested in pursuing an MBA, considering an MBA, definitely feel free to share this content with them. So with that, let's get started. So operations and supply chain is one of the more substantive backgrounds in application pools across MBA programs. This is people with cross-functional complexity, execution at scale, and measurable outcomes. The question this session is built around isn't whether that background is competitive, because it absolutely is. Rather, the question is whether the file that represents your experiences and the impact is communicated in a way that actually makes it compelling for Adcoms. If you've been following me, you hear me talking about this all the time. If two people have a very similar experience with no measurable difference, similar perspective, only one of them is going to get into a program. So what your job is to do is to communicate the complexity and the nuance in your experiences that make you stand out, that make you different from another ops and supply chain candidate who's applying. Some candidates in this room have already been able to communicate those nuances. But for those who haven't, the path forward is definitely not more effort, but it is a clear view of how those programs read your specific profile and obviously in more nuanced way go through understanding of what or how you're going to present your experiences to them in a way that makes you different. Adcoms at Sloan, Ross, and Kellogg, these are programs that a lot of supply chain and ops candidates are really interested in. They are fast readers. They have developed precise pattern recognition for certain backgrounds. They understand, broadly speaking, what your background brings to the table. That pattern they recognize in an ops or supply chain file is strong execution, measurable results, right? You're always, everything that you're doing, you are measuring, and functional domain expertise. What that pattern does not automatically carry is organizational authority, the sense that someone has led beyond the scope of the work they were assigned. And this is not necessarily a judgment on the work itself, it's really a presentation, a framing problem. When a profile, when a candidate presents their file onto in a way that kind of fits the category the Adcom has already knows, right? It tends to blend in. But what you want to do is, yes, of course, there's a category or an element of what they know and understand. But then you want to map out some elements about your experiences that are not necessarily very visible in every supply chain and ops candidate that goes through and applies to these programs. That specific thing needs to be essentially engineered in terms of how you're presenting your profile. And it starts with understanding how the pattern recognition actually works at each of these programs before you even do any writing itself. When it comes to candidates with this background that are coming to business school, you're going to have a lot of metrics across all of your profile. And metrics are real evidence, and Adcoms do look at them with interest. What determines how those metrics land is the context around them. What surrounds a number is what tells the Adcom what it actually means. So I see this very often where candidates present a lot of numbers in their resume, but don't really translate how they think, how they operate, how they solve complex problems. And that context, or with missing context like that, the admission committee is going to not necessarily see what difference do you bring to the table than another supply chain and ops candidate just like you. So looking at the schools, Sloan is reading for whether you can think through system under ambiguity. That doesn't necessarily come through in metrics alone. Ross is reading for cross-functional authority with a line of sight on the business outcomes. Again, that's not going to show up in metrics if you don't give context. And Kellogg is reading for how you led when you didn't own the org chart. This is an important nuance because if you rely solely on outcomes themselves, you miss out a whole complex individual that you are that they would not get to see because they, again, don't know you until they get to read your applications. So if a file delivers the same nuance at these three schools, the version of like I execute well, none of them are going to get the specific answer that they're looking for. And obviously that is going to absolutely dictate outcomes in terms of who they want in the classroom. And the element around what these schools are looking for, it's really going to show, it really has to start rather even before you select the schools in understanding first and foremost what do you bring to the table. And that's the positioning element that comes into play, especially when we work with a client through the beginning phases. What experiences do you have? Who are you? What experiences do you have? And what are you looking to do? All of those are the baseline, the foundational questions that we need very much clarity around before we can start moving into how do we communicate this experience in a way that each of your target schools is going to be interested in. The most common feedback candidates get is that they need to tell a better story. That's directionally right, but not specific enough to act on. I mean, what is a better story, right? What actually changes how an Adcom reads a file isn't necessarily better writing. Clear writing, yes, but not necessarily quote unquote better writing. It is a set of decisions about which experience gets surfaced, in what order, and what they're made to mean given where you say you're going. That is an architecture that needs to be mapped out before any single word is written. A career can read as someone who got progressively better at one function, or it can read as someone who was building judgment and influence across different contexts, right? The difference between those two reads isn't what happened in the career, it's how the experiences are being framed and are being presented and are being surfaced for the reader who will have 20 minutes to read your application. And these decisions have to be made, again, before a single word is written, because it changed the amount of, it changes the quality of your application, how you're presenting yourself. But again, it's not about working harder. It is about being more strategic in how you approach your applications from the get-go. So Ross, MIT, and Kellogg each have a distinct lens for their background. They are genuinely not looking for the same candidate. Ross weighs cross-functional scale and business outcomes. So if your work has touched P&L, resource allocation, or trade-offs across functions, that's what's going to register at Ross. Sloan is a system thinker's problem. For an ops candidate specifically, they're reading for whether you can take operational pattern recognitions and apply it to problems that don't come with a defined process or a clear answer. Kellogg's lens is more relational. They want to see that your influence extends beyond the formal authority you were given by title, that you led through credibility rather than title. And that is what the Kellogg community is all about. So you have to embody that before even showing up to campus. So sending similar application across all three schools isn't automatically a problem, but only if each program is actually getting the answer it's looking for. That's really what your job is as an applicant. And that's the checks worth doing. Those are the checks worth doing, again, before anything is written, because you always have to keep in mind the audience that you're speaking to. The default process most candidates follow is to start writing, get feedback, revise, repeat, right? That process creates cleaner prose, absolutely. What it doesn't change are the decisions that were made before the first word went on the page. Which recommender was chosen, which experiences anchors the application, how the post-MBA goal frames the kind of leader this person is becoming, and how is the past experience tied to the future goal. If those decisions don't line up with what a given program is looking for, revisions of just telling your story is not going to fix it. Essays are the product of a set of early choices, and they're only as strong as those choices were when they were made. At C Admissions, the first phase of work is always about mapping the file before building anything. That's why the process, it typically initially is very intense in the context of reflection, understanding, and discussing and building that strategy before anything is communicated. Building the goals before a resume is written, building the goals before a recommender is reached out to, etc. Each or everything that is written after, right, is a byproduct of those strategy sessions, of those discussions that we've had early on, because we are building from a solid foundation that makes the process then easier. Not easy, but easier once you know where you're going. And I know, as I obviously work with this population, that essays are always going to get the most attention. When applicants are early in the phase of this journey, they always think, how am I going to write my essays? So I know that essays get a lot of attention because that's where you spend most of your time thinking. But essays, recommendations, and interview each reveal something different about how the overall profile was built, and they don't fall short for the same reasons. Essays reflect the positioning decisions that were made before the drafting began. If those decisions were off, the writing won't cover them. So it is really important that you have that solid foundation, right? Important also is you don't get to the interview phase if you didn't work on your essays, right? So It is a building block. Your application should be looked at as a building block of over a variety of different pieces. Recommendations tend to default towards describing what the candidate did, because most recommenders without specific guidance will write in the same functional register the application is otherwise trying to move past, right? Recommenders, especially if they're not accustomed to writing MBA letters of recommendation, are going to go to that default positioning, which is not going to help you tell a story that you have been building in your application, right? Interviews surface the full picture, a live conversation where the interviewer in some cases has read your application, but in all cases has read your resume, and is looking for a candidate to fill in whatever the material left off, right? These are 3 different problems, and they require 3 different kinds of attention at 3 different points in the application process. So the way we look at an application as we're building it, it is each one of those phases. We're thinking at the end, in the beginning, right? What is it going to look like at the end when we first start building that profile? Because obviously, if you're going through this process, you want to get to the interview phase, you want to get to the admission phase, and you have to think through those pieces early enough to make sure that everything is built effectively across the board. Now, at the time of this live session, we are in March, and you may think round 1 is months away, round 2 is even further out, but the calendar may look more forgiving than it actually is. Candidates targeting round 1 at Sloan, Ross, or Kellogg have a window that, once you account for summer and the gaps between decisions to move and actually moving, the timeline tightens, and you want to start sooner rather than later. The positioning work that happens before drafting time is around. It needs the additional time that it requires to carry those strategy building components, right? If you're building with a strategic lens of each piece, first and foremost, I need to understand my story. What am I saying? What are my experiences? All of that happens before a single essay is written, before a resume is written, before you choose your recommenders, right? So you need to give yourself time to do that preemptively before you actually do the work of the writing itself, right? So starting in June or July for a September deadline doesn't leave a lot of room for those early decisions to actually inform everything downstream, right? You are moving then really fast when a lot of this process requires a lot of reflection before you make moves, make decisions. I always think of the writing as like the easier part of the entire process, because a lot of the heavy lifting comes earlier than the writing actually begins. So the candidates who tend to have the clearest outcomes are the ones who really start early, that give themselves enough time to reflect and really make sure that what they're communicating, and they're doing a lot of different kinds of communications along the way, isn't compressed, because when you are in the panic mode, you are not really thinking that clearly, right? The window is really when you have time to continue reflecting, to refining, and going through those variety of different communications with a clear mind and not a rushed process. So as we approach the end, a few things to note. This session covered the 3 things that we talked about: how the outcome reads an ops and supply chain background, why the positioning shift is an architectural exercise, a strategy exercise before anything is written, and where in the application cycle this background tends to require the most attention, which is earlier in the phase of the development. What it didn't do is obviously look at your specific situation. So at this point, I would say if you have a specific background that you want to clarify, please write it in the comments. Otherwise, if you want written feedback where where you stand and what needs to improve, then I invite you to request a profile evaluation. That information can be found in the comments of the platform you're joining us from, or in our YouTube replay when it becomes available on our YouTube channel. The profile evaluation is conducted by me. I read your profile. I will give you feedback on it. And then if you are ready to, move forward and talk about, I know I need support in this process to tell my story, and you are evaluating consultants, I invite you to request a consultation to discuss how our process works. Well, first and foremost, before that, your profile, but also how our process works, and if there's an alignment on both ends, right? Again, that will be available also on the comments and in the description of our replay video. So we have about 8 minutes, and at this moment, I think we should move to questions. Excellent. So let's see. If you have any questions, please write in the comments. And if you like this video, give it a thumbs up so the algorithms do its thing, essentially. All right, let's see. The first question, should my resume lead with impact metric or scope of responsibility first? We have videos on this in our YouTube channel, so you can definitely go back and watch some of those that we walk through what a MBA resume looks like. But essentially, an MBA resume should, or at least the way we think of an MBA resume at C Admissions, is that it tells a short story around the experiences that you've had, your greatest achievements, right? Because at the end of the day, your resume is a reflection of what has been, or should be a reflection of what have been your greatest achievements. So it's not about having the most number of bullets. It is really about having the depth that someone reading it can glean how you think, how you operate beyond the outcome itself, right? And if they combine that with your essays, they get a broader sense of who you are and how you think and how you make decisions, right? So I hope that kind of leads to the conclusion that in order to have a really strong, a really solid resume, it is really to give the scope of responsibility, the kind of engagement, and the kind of work that you have done to get to the result. Obviously, the metrics still need to be there, but that's a byproduct of how you make decisions and how you move forward in your storytelling, right, of your experiences that you've had. So I would say depth of responsibility is a foreground, and then from there, it is obviously metrics as a byproduct of the work that you have done. Excellent. Next question. How do I structure the goals essay when my target role, consulting, looks like a big leap from ops? I wouldn't necessarily say that consulting is a huge leap from ops, but it's really understanding what your role currently, what experiences in your role you've had, and how does that map to consulting. But even beyond that, what I would suggest is that you don't necessarily think about just your post-MBA goal. You should be thinking about an MBA as a long-term plan. So every decision that you make, every experience that you have, every development opportunity that you're looking to have should be mapped out towards getting you towards a long-term goal that you have. So it really, you kind of are reverse engineering. Like if I want to be leading as a CEO of semiconductor business or something like that, what do I need to get there? What skill sets do I need? What kind of experience do I need to have? And then you're reverse engineering that. So your ops experience is actually can be quite aligned with your consulting, but obviously more details on like, what does your ops experience actually look like right now and where the gaps are? It's a really important question. And I invite you to request a profile evaluation so that we can look at that. And if you do submit your profile evaluation, do include your resume, because it helps me really get the better scope of what your experiences have been, and I can give you more context and more details in your application, or rather where your strengths and where your weaknesses lie. Excellent. Should I brief my recommenders on what stories to tell, or does it make the letter sound coached? I think the recommender, so first and foremost, the recommender is someone who, or you should choose a recommender that really wants to endorse you and wants to support you. They have to be excited about you. Now, you also must understand that recommenders have many different people that they have led, they lead, and they may not really remember all the nuances of what you have done, right? So your job is to give them a little bit of context, but you should also give them a bit more structure around what do you want to do, where are you going in your career, so that they get a sense of how to present your story, right? And then give them some examples of what you would hope that they would write about, and also as a reminder of what you have done, right? Just in case that they have forgotten about the thing that you want them to talk about. This way, both your application and your letters of recommendation are in alignment, moving towards the same outcome. I have more, I had actually just recently published an article on this topic specifically on our C admission blog post. So I do cover a lot more context on this. So if you go to cadmission.com and look at the blogs, you will see the letter recommendation discussion there. And that can be really helpful to kind of see even who you should ask, how you should position, and how you should help them make sure that they're successful in their letter recommendation. Excellent. All right. And then last question. How much does an application round matter for ops candidates? Is round one already too competitive? Can't be too competitive. That's typically the first question, the first round, right? So I would say the earlier you start, the earlier you submit your application, the higher your chances. But only do it if you have a really solid profile, right? You have competitive test scores. You have a really strong application overall, meaning you have told a really compelling story throughout the process. If either one of those falls short, move to round two. You will have they admit relatively equal amounts of numbers between round one and round two. But if you apply in round one just to submit an application in round one, you may lose the opportunity to actually attend that class if you haven't really put together a strong application, right? So it's really about quality over speed. But I only mean that between round one and round two. I don't mean that between round two and round three. Round three is something I don't recommend you actually apply, or most applicants, I don't recommend that they apply in round three, just because by round three, most of the class is already filled, and your profile has to be much better than anyone on the wait list to be admitted. So if you are at round three, might as well just do round one the following year. All right, thank you so much for watching. Hopefully this was helpful as you navigate these next steps in your journey, wherever that may look like, or whatever that may look like at this moment. Next week, we are actually coming back to current round two applicants as they're receiving decisions. We know some of the schools have already started releasing decisions, and by next week, a lot of them would have already released decision. Not all, but a lot of them would have released decisions. So if you are already an applicant in round two, definitely register for that event. Ask questions based on your specific outcomes that you know at least so far. And we'll talk a bit more about what to do next, especially if you have been rejected from schools that you really want to be a part of. We can talk through what does that look like for you. If you have friends, again, that are in that boat, please feel free to share the event with them, the event registration link, so that they can attend as well or get the replay afterwards. Wonderful. Thank you so much for being here. I look forward to seeing you next week. Hi, I'm Susan Berishaj, founder of C Admissions. If you'd like to go deeper into MBA strategy, watch the next video here. And if you want more insights on building a standout application, click here to subscribe.